pleasure to introduce to you Professor Murray, Professor Alan Murray, who has come all the way from Falmouth University, UK, to conduct a training on core design pedagogies and future themes which are emerging. Just now we were discussing in Dean's office also that UK is also, their university is also going through a transition and change in curriculum and teaching methods and things. So we had a very brief discussion about what we are going through and what we are looking at. And Professor Murray is going to help us look at what they are doing and what can be adapted in limited conditions here also. He comes with a vast experience. He's Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academics at Falmouth University. And he's been instrumental in doing curriculums and doing amalgamation with university and schools, and through these years of experience, almost 20 years of his experience with the universities, even more than that. He is also worked, he's got a vast experience of working in other countries in Europe, and you just said that you were in Netherlands. Yeah, Netherlands. And then also with China. They have set up a university in Shanghai with collaboration and also with London College of Fashion and Bunka. We also have a collaboration with Donghua and with Bunka and with London College of Fashion. There is a session plan that he has shared with me, but he is going to work on this again after the brief discussion that we had. And his profile is really, really huge, and I would like him to tell us about his work before we start and before we have a quick round of introduction.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. I'm sorry I have this presentation, but if your eyesight is anything like mine, you won't see any of it. So let's do our best. Any presentations that I have, I'll make sure that you all can have as well. So if you want to have a look at them afterwards, and any films that I show and everything like that, I'll show you later. It is quite difficult to plan this, because I planned the whole thing, and then talking to your dean, I realised that I'll have to plan something else. You're quite advanced in where you are and where you want to be. So some of these presentations are a little bit too basic for you. So I'll try and plan some of the experience that I had and see whether that's useful. And obviously, for me to speak for 3 hours every day is not going to be any use. So it's as much about the discussion and the worries and the concerns and the development that we need to do, which will be the useful thing. So if you don't mind, although I had the whole thing planned, I am going to play it a little bit more by ear, and I'm going to try and develop things and develop little small things which will help the more and more I realise where we're going and what we're doing. Okay? So this is me. I am now the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academic at Falmouth University. Falmouth University is an arts university. It was the #1 arts university in the UK, so it's a full arts university with all the subjects of the arts in there, including fashion and textiles. And the reason that we were noted as the #1 arts university because how seriously the UK takes league tables. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I'm sure it's the same in India, but actually it's transformed the way we do things and how we do things. So it will be interesting to have a look at that and see whether that has any relevance with what you're doing and how you're doing it. In the past, before Falmouth, I was the Deputy Principal of Edinburgh College of Art, which was part of the University of Edinburgh. Edinburgh, as you may know, has got a great tradition for fashion and a greater tradition for textiles. So as part of the the development work that I did there, I also set up the Scottish Academy of Fashion, and that was to work with all the textile makers in Scotland and to try and develop fashion for those textiles. So that was a really interesting time. Edinburgh College of Art was an independent art school which was around since 1765, and when I was there we decided to merge with the University of Edinburgh, which was a huge thing and something that I drove through. University of Edinburgh is one of the oldest universities in the UK, second only to Oxbridge, and it was developed, it was created in 1576. So it's a very, very old university, an ancient university we call in the UK. And it was very, very interested to bring the art college together with the University of Edinburgh. And the reason that we merged was that the University of Edinburgh is top 20 in the world, but they didn't have an art school as part of it. And they looked to the US, and they looked at different top universities in the US, and they realized that to have the full vocabulary of subjects, including art school, including fashion, fine art, everything else, was the missing piece of the jigsaw. So they were very keen to merge with Edinburgh College of Art, and we came together a year before I left. So that was an interesting time as well, and when bringing curriculums together from an ancient university and a small independent art school was also very interesting. Your dean asked, it must have been interesting because the university must have been very tight with its regulations and the art school very loose, but actually it was exactly the opposite. So the art school, because it was independent and the wolf is always at the door, was very, very clear about its regulations and almost did them too much, whereas the university was so confident. It was an ancient university whose model in the 1700s went to America and became the basis of the Ivy League model. So the Harvards used the University of Edinburgh model, that they were so confident in the things that they did that you could do anything. So actually, an art school coming into an ancient university was a very pleasurable thing to happen, because all of the things we were worried about became less worrying when we moved to the university. And also, the collaboration happened from the day that the contracts were signed by the Scottish Parliament. So the collaboration between neurology and between computer sciences and everybody else really started to happen in a meaningful way from that point on. So I also before we merged, I was the head of design at Edinburgh College of Art. Before that, I was director of design at the Technical University in Eindhoven. Now those who do, does anybody know Eindhoven or heard of Eindhoven a little bit? So Eindhoven is a very interesting city in the Netherlands with a very good reputation, because 90% of design and technology goes through Eindhoven. Eindhoven, before Philips started the city there, was just a village. But Philips, as you know, Philips, which is now to do with health products, or used to be to do with all electrical products, they decided to set up there, and then lots of industry went to Eindhoven, OSE and DAF Trucks and countless others, and they set up in Eindhoven, so it's a very important place for technology. So one of the key people we worked with at the university, Technical University in Eindhoven, was Philips. And Philips was really interesting because they're a very forward-thinking company, and Philips had a university without students. I don't know whether anybody's ever been there. NatLab it's called, and NatLab is just full of innovative professors, and the innovative professors invent things and then they develop things. So NatLab is a university without students, which For me, it's not a great place, but it's quite interesting. And what I'll do, after talking to your dean, I'll do a little case study on that for you to show what we did as a reference to that. So I won't talk about that now. I was also director of something called the Fun Lab at the Design Academy Eindhoven. So the Design Academy Eindhoven's a very famous academy in Europe, I guess. It was voted the best academy in the world at the time. I never, you know, it's always funny when something's voted the best in the world, but you use it while you can. So the Design Academy was very interesting because it was located in a Philips building, the Vita Dama, the White Lady, and it was in the middle of all the industry there, and the Design Academy became very well known for its experimentation, but also because it attracted great designers there. So there's a design group called Droog Design, Dry Design, and they were all the lecturers there. So that was also an interesting time. And the Fun Lab was very interesting. I was director there for a while. The Fun Lab was an experiential postgraduate, so you did everything by experiencing. So the first project of the Fun Lab, in its first manifestation, was, here's a suitcase, we're going to drop you off in some other part of Europe, find your way back and tell us a story. So it was that kind of curriculum. It was a beautiful curriculum, very, very nice. So then I was also head of the department play, so you can see my portfolio is all to do with fun and play and messing around. But it was very interesting, the Faculty of Industrial Design that I mentioned earlier, and I'll talk about that as well later, is that the Technical University is a very traditional university, more known for its biomedical work and biomedical study than anything else. And they wanted to develop a Faculty of Industrial Design, and they asked me to set that up. And what was really interesting was they didn't have industrial design there before. Delft is very well known for industrial design. So we had to come up with something that was completely different, had different principles, and also did things in a different way. So I'll use that also as a case study later. I'll build it tonight. And I'll also explain what we did and how we did it there, because it's very interesting for curriculum design. Now that I know everything's about the curriculum design, I'll bring some other things into this. So the departments in the industrial design, we called them one-name names on purpose. So there was play, there was home, and other departments, and it was really to explore what play was. Play was everything you do when you're not at work, but obviously we know gamification has changed all of those things as well. So home, play, and all of these other things. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also I was coordinator of Man and Leisure, again, leisure, play, fun, at the Design Academy Eindhoven as well when I first moved to Eindhoven. So I have some things that I do constantly. One of them is that I'm the international external panel member for evaluating NAFA, the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, and LaSalle, that you might have heard of LaSalle in Singapore. And I'm contracted by the Ministry of Education in Singapore to do that, which is very interesting. For those people who do validations and international validations, you'll know that it's a fantastic thing to do, because a university just opens its book and you have a look at everything they do and talk to all the students and all the faculty, and it's a great thing to do. So I've learned an awful lot by doing that. I also, and it was mentioned already, that I helped set up the Shanghai International College of Fashion Innovation. That was alongside Bunker and London College of Fashion. And it was Donghua's vision that they wanted to create a kind of elite university or subsidiary which got enhanced funding from the Chinese government, and that also through collaboration and through different ways of looking at things and different modules and different people coming in, it became a leader in its field. And I must say, it was very interesting doing that, because I had to consistently, I think I went to Shanghai 20 times in 2 or 3 years, and usually working in Shanghai was in a space like this with the doors locked, doing contracts and then sorting everything out. But it was really interesting to work alongside Bunker. I think Donghua is a fantastic university with a great research profile, and they were very elegant. Similar to you, when I met deans and directors and vice chancellors, they were all women, which is very refreshing in a very male-dominated university sector that I work in. But also they were very elegant with the way that they did things. So the curriculum that we developed and how we developed it was very interesting. Okay, so you won't be able to see that at all, but this is Falmouth. We're on the edge of the world here. So right at the end of that funny little fork we are. So it's 120 years old, the university, and it was originally Falmouth School of Art. And so right on the edge of the country, miles and miles from anywhere else, actually in a tropical zone. So I have banana plants and palm plants in my garden, because it never freezes and snows there. It's nice, it's a peninsula. And this was built and developed. And it's developed over the years for quite some reasons. In a way, it's miles away from any urban development, but it's become a centre for research and development. So that's one of the reasons that I went there, was that I thought that it was a university that was going for it. It really is trying to develop things. You can see here where it is. Those that might have heard of the Eden Project was a project, a Millennium Project in the UK, and also we have a Tate gallery there as well. I love showing this little photograph, because this is the Tate Museum for Contemporary Art, which is on the beach. So it's very strange. And whenever I show it in China or elsewhere, people think it's absurd to have that. We tried to turn that light off.
Yeah.
Perfect. It was the last one.
Yes.
It's always the last one. So Falmouth University, we have 2 campuses. We have developed lots of buildings. This is the inside of Fashion and Textiles Institute. We have a performance theatre and music theatre, libraries, others. So we have a very, let's say, appropriate campus, very big campus that we share with University of Exeter, one of the campuses, and we've invested an awful lot of money on the infrastructure, the buildings, and the way that we teach students. I would say in Falmouth, in reference to other universities, what we've tried to do in Falmouth is to get as much money, as much oxygen to the front line, to the students as possible. So we've cut out lots of infrastructure, we've got one director of the different departments, thank you very much. We've got, we don't have associate head of research and associate dean of research, and we just have one person. I have 5 or 6 jobs, and the whole philosophy of Falmouth is to try and get as much resource to the student as possible. And the students feel, we feel as if the students feel that they feel as if they are being focused on. And I'll explain why that has happened in the UK and why that's changed as well. There's been quite a shift in the UK education, and it's much, much more student focused. So I'm sure this is the same in India. In fact, I'm sure it's even more in India, but I'll just explain the UK context. So in the UK, the creative economy, which was always seen as a very soft area, something that was you wouldn't do art and design unless you couldn't do other subjects. It's a kind of fluffy thing around the edges. It doesn't make a lot of money for the economy. It's not an important part of the economy. We now know that that's very different. So it's the UK's fastest growing sector. It creates worth £76 billion a year. And so the number of UK jobs in creative occupations grew by 6.4% and outstrips all other sectors. So whereas other sectors have been decreasing, the creative economy in the UK has increased by 6.4%. So there were 2.8 million jobs in the UK in 2014 across the creative economy. And 1 in 11 of UK jobs now fall within the creative economy, which is enormous.
Have you also enlarged the definition of what falls within the creative?
Yes, so I'll come on that to a second. So it's true. So 1 in 11 jobs in the UK, 1 in 6 of all jobs in the UK held by graduates, so people who have been educated at a university, are in the creative economy. So this is the interesting slide that we're talking about. So what Falmouth did was, when we started to get the data through, we started to see what the creative economy looked like. We started to build a university which was more towards that shape of economy. We can also see that little drop there, the little small thing here, are the crafts in the UK, and decreasing. We've also got advertising, so we build the advertising. So essentially, yeah, what we always believed to be the creative industries was the core creative industries, and it's the subjects like fashion and advertising. But what we also realised was that there was a creative industries wider economy. And the wider economy is much wider than the core, and actually is more important to the creative industries than the core. So again, you can see the way it's developed in the UK and the jobs that I was talking about. But employment in the UK, that middle thing there, shows that the core stuff, the pink stuff in the middle, actually there's a 1.9 million outside that as well. So the economy is more important than the core. Sorry.
Can you go back to the previous slide? What is it? 3 to 3, 5? Design, smaller circle. Design and fashion.
Design and fashion, yeah. So it's the core design and fashion things. So I think
say design,
it's around graphic design and things like that, yeah. So I think one of the big learning moments for
advertising also
is much bigger than design.
that was beyond graphic design, because advertising also has a lot of graphics.
Yeah, it has a lot of graphics, but it's known as its own industry. So I can show you this and I can share this with you, and obviously it's always very debatable. But what we realised was that the wider economy was very important to universities, and it was important to get the message across to parents and potential students that it's not just you study in your core, fashion or graphics, but those transferable skills to the wider economy are very important. We need the design process to be taken into accountancy, to be taken into law and everything else. So in a way, that's been the UK context, is that the transferable skills to the wider economy are extremely important.
So basically what we are saying is also in a way that the definition of how and what about that?
Perfect.
I'm just saying that in that sense we also need to does it also mean, and as we've been saying, that the whole definition of fashion and what we consider as design has moved into a completely new arena altogether? And that's where, when you say transferability of skills,
yeah,
is very, very critical.
So a typical fashion student in the UK now will finish their degree, but then struggle to get any job designing in the UK. The only jobs they usually can get are in retail, working in a shop. So there's very good examples of students who have to go to China for 2, 3, 4 years, work their way up, and it's quicker in that environment for them. They work their way up, and then they come back to UK with a CV that shows that they've been doing design on a bigger scale. Because very, very, very few students get a chance to go straight into design. So because of the size of design and fashion, but the bigger, wider economy, it's really important that we make sure that they have those transferable skills. Not because we don't think that the fashion can grow, but at the moment it's not doing. It's just staying where it is. And much of the production and manufacturing is happening elsewhere. And to get your hands on those jobs in design is very, very difficult to do. So it's a bigger question. I have no answers, but that's what we realised in the UK.
Alan, would you be also able to add, when you're talking about the case studies tonight, would you be also able to bring out some case studies from, if you've got some case studies to illustrate this aspect in terms of these changes and to introduce it in design and how students have come about and how it has transformed?
I'll try to, yeah.
And also on design strategy.
Yeah, yeah. So just to look at what I was talking about before, that light blue line is creative jobs in the creative industries, and you'll see that the orange line is total UK employment. So the orange line is pretty flat, and the jobs and employment and in the creative industries and economy has grown really quickly in the UK.
So is it in the formal domain or is it in the informal?
It depends whether you call the creative economy the informal domain. And it's often that they want to mirror design as their own design agency within a company, or their own photographic agency. So it might be a big supermarket wants its own photographic agency and then develops it, etc., etc. A supermarket wants to develop its own clothes line, its own advertising and everything like that. So yeah, informal in that way.
That World Trade Organization in the UN has a huge document on World Trade Organization of UN has a huge document on creative economy, which was released I think 5 years ago. And they have, I think, interestingly, mapped the entire world. And again, as you said, that it's again a very, very big growing area.
Yes. Sorry, I'm sure you know more about this than me, but I think it's quite interesting just to see the UK context and then see how that can be, what we can look at, what we can learn. So this is total employment in the creative industries, and you'll see how much that's grown to 2018. And also there you see that creative art and design has 24% change, but also what's interesting is that it's bigger than engineering in the UK now. So all those stories of it being fluffy, around the edge, not important, we're having to try and change that with the government, with the parents, and with the students, to realise that there is actually quite amazing careers in the creative industries. And some of the things I'll talk about is how those jobs in the creative industries and the wider creative industries have become much more of a mashup these days. They just want teams of creative people doing projects, actually. They don't want as much a kind of graphic designer or an advert. They want So they were inventing new job titles, and actually what our graduates are doing are developing creative projects, delivering those projects, and then going on to the next project. So that's quite interesting. I just want to show this. You won't see this, won't be able to see this, but the funding of degrees in the UK has changed quite a lot recently. So, firstly, all degrees in the UK were free, and then in 1995 we brought the first fees into being. So you paid £3,000 fees, and steadily the fees have gone up until one point where each student pays £9,000 per year to do a degree in the UK. So it's very expensive for students to do a degree. It's a loan, so they get a loan. They don't have to pay it back until they're earning a certain amount. So it becomes a dormant loan until they earn £20,000 a year. But the perception by a student is that they're doing a degree and getting a huge debt by doing the degree. So actually, education doesn't stay the same when that happens. Students pay, if it's a 3-year degree, they've got a debt of over £27,000. That's just in fees. Never mind living, eating, and everything. It's very expensive. Actually, that income isn't any more or less than it was when the government paid for it. So for universities, it's the same amount of money coming in. It's just that the money's been changed from being government funded to the student. And it was the government's belief that then the student would decide whether they wanted to do a degree, and also maybe cherish it more if they were paying for it and paying a cost price for it. Maybe more responsible. So for universities, the only difference was that if we get a student, we get the fee. Whereas in the past, it was always that you had a certain amount of students, there was a limit on the students, because the government was paying for it. So you always had to get to your limit, and then you were penalised if you went over the limit. And you also, when you got your funding letter, it would always be in November, too late. They'd take 20% off, and they'd take another 30% off if you reach certain. So it was always very difficult to plan. Whereas now it's much clearer, and universities can strategically plan. So they get a certain income in. So for Falmouth it's 43 million a year. And we can plan, as long as we get those students in, we can build new buildings, we can build infrastructure, because it's very clear transaction and very clear for us. It's difficult for the students because they've gone from paying nothing, or 3,000, to 9,000 a year with this big debt. But in fact, it hasn't saved the government any money either, because it's just transference for them, because it's just a different way of doing it through taxes.
We have a similar, I think, situation in last 1 decade.
Yeah.
Government is self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Why does the government need to do this?
Because often the student doesn't get a job over £20,000, so that's lost.
But at the same time,
Don't forget your microphone.
but at the same time, the education has become so expensive that the number of people going into higher education has become lesser and lesser with time.
No. So the surprising thing is that more and more students have gone into education. And actually, the even more surprising thing is, more students from a poorer background have gone into education. So it's a very strange thing that's happened. It's almost been the clarity of this. So when the limit of students was taken off, all students had an opportunity to go to university. It was seen as a less elite place to go because it wasn't whether your father and your grandfather had been to university, but if you applied for a loan you got it, and lots of students saw it as an opportunity, didn't mind too much about the debt, and lots of people from a poorer background have gone to university, and because taking off the limits of numbers has meant that more people have gone to university. So it's a strange thing that more poorer people have gone and more people have gone to university. So I'll tell you a little story now. When I was in Singapore last time, I was with the Ministry of Education in Singapore, and they said, this creative industries thing, we don't understand. When we have dentists, we know how many dentists we have to educate because we know how many teeth there are in Singapore, and we know how many dentists we need, so we know how many to educate. With the creative industries, we've just put 3 billion into the creative industries, and we just can't get a picture of it. What do? Do we educate more? Do we educate less? Do we make it more elite? And actually, in the UK, what happened was, the UK all of a sudden started educating more and more people, and we started educating more people in the creative industries, because that's what people wanted to do, and they wanted to do creative subjects, and we created more graduates than there were jobs. But what those graduates did with their transferable skills was to go out and create the creative industry economy. They clustered together in creative clusters, they developed new companies, they developed new ways of working, and it became, as I've just described, a very creative and growing. And in some ways you could plot that back to us over-educating too many people in the creative industries. Now, that's quite debatable, so I wouldn't stand up for it in court, but I would say that that idea of the creative industries, that idea of educating an awful lot of students in the creative industries, and then for them having to find a way of becoming relevant after the degree, helps support that growth in the creative industries.
The trend is pretty similar in our country, all these matters.
Yes.
Talking about it, I found it
Pretty similar.
Yeah, you've got to press your mic. Just say it again, what you said.
Saying it's a pretty similar trend. I think we are also observing in our country. More and more poor people are coming because the loans are there. Whereas people from a less poor background are not going into higher education because for different reasons. Either they kind of want to become entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So that change in emphasis has meant that overnight students are paying a lot of money. So universities that was, I would say, and I don't know whether you would agree with me, at one point universities were there for the lecturers, for the professors, for the research. And what flipped in the UK was that it couldn't be the same anymore. That the student experience, the value for money for the students, became more and more important. And actually in the UK, students were very elegant. So they wanted to go to university. They didn't want the university system to implode, because if it did, they were buying into something that wasn't there anymore. They liked the pomp, you know, they liked the fact that they put the gown on and got graduated at the end. But they also felt as if it was a meaningful experience for them. But they did start to change their focus a little bit. And on this diagram you can see that when undergraduates were asked what in hindsight was the most important thing, the value for a degree, then it was, the highest was employability. Not on the first day. If you asked them on the first day, it was length of lectures or equipment and things like that. But as the degree went on, it was about what kind of job am I going to get for all this investment in this. So that's been a big thing in the UK, is what around employability. What about employability? How does that change the way that we do things? Okay, So there's where we are at the moment. Anybody got any questions or thoughts, or what time are we on now?
It's 10:45.
10:45. So we've done 45 minutes. I've planned something which is a course, but I fear that it's too basic for what you want. I've done something on assessment and feedback, and also employability, but I think that where you're at is more around where you want the future to be.
I think this also would be good
It's okay, we could
to
start
run through
with
this, and then
we could start with this.
Start with this, tell me if it's too basic, and if it is too basic, I'll go on to the next bit and rewrite this later on, okay? So let's talk about this. And really it's about our where you want to be with these things. If it's too basic, there's other things that I can do.
Alan, it would be nice because it will give us some touch points.
Yeah, okay. Okay, but if it's too basic, then tell me.
Basic and our basic may be different.
Yeah. So what I planned was a series of lectures, films, workshops, seminars and discussions on some aspects of pedagogy. And really the idea is, and it goes back to this idea of student experience, is to improve the student experience, promote consistency, compliance, and sharing of good practice in order to increase access and enhancement. So more people get more chance to understand and be part of a university education. So the objectives are promote consistent academic practice, increase compliance with policy procedures, improve student experience, cross-fertilise good practice, and develop enhancement themes that anticipate the future. So that's the last part of it. So I have today something on assessment practice, that would be quicker than the other one, but then something on feedback as well. And the feedback is how should we be looking at feedback, why is it important, what's the student's approach to feedback, what are they looking for, everything around that. And I won't bother showing the rest of these because I'm going to change them. But I have something around employability, something around inclusive learning, something around blended learning. Is good too? Yeah? Okay, alright. And then...
Also we'll be able to see the different perspective, I guess. And then...
Okay. And then then I go on to the future university, and I'll start that maybe tomorrow. I'll carry on with this, and then I'll introduce that. What Falmouth University's done is develop a 2030 strategy, so for the year 2030. And what we did was to say, if we're in 2030, let's look back, and how will universities have changed? What do we need to do, and how do we need to do it for these huge changes that are happening? So the second part of the week will be on that, okay, and everything around that. And obviously discussion is a really important part of that. But I would like to show some case studies of maybe the Technical University in Eindhoven, what happened there. I'll also do one around our own curriculum reform that we did recently and the principles around that, and then any other things that I can do. Okay? Does anybody need a break now? Or you're okay to go straight in?
Yeah, I mean, I would be really interested, in your experiences around the Fun Lab and how you have evolved the design process. You're learning as well. So if you can talk to us about, how you've evolved the design process from your experiences with these different areas of, and what are the strategies?
Yes.
So that would be something very interesting.
It is taken into account a little bit in the 2030 strategy, but yeah, we can do that and discuss that. Great. Okay, so let me find the next bit. Okay, part 2 of our training. So what I want to do is to just have a little think about assessment practice. Okay, so I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have faculty from lots of different areas, okay? From lots of different parts of the university with lots of different experiences of assessment. So what I want to do is to just think about what that assessment is. So a key point is that assessment and feedback, something we're going to talk about in a minute, is absolutely essential for successful student learning. What students look to, almost in an unbalanced way, is the assessment. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier in the UK that's happened is that we have very, very clear league tables, okay? So we're judged, the quality of teaching that we do is judged by league tables. And the main league table part is something that we call the National Student Survey. Do you have a similar thing? No. So ours is across the whole sector, across the whole university, and when students leave, 80–90% of them give very, very, very detailed feedback on the university course they've just done. So it's on assessment, it's on feedback, it's on organisation, it's on library services, it's on resources, access to resources. It takes quite a long time for each student to do it. They do it while they're leaving the university, but then the National Student Survey chases them afterwards and then offers them incentives to do the survey. So it usually means that for any university course, 90%, 95% of your students have done the survey. And we take it very, very seriously because we're judged on that survey. So when we said that students have more choice, they also have more power as well. And we have different league tables in the UK. We have a Guardian league table, a Times league table, so they're usually connected to newspapers. The Guardian league table takes account of the National Student Survey, an environmental survey, not research, and the Times league table takes into research as well. So for us, the league tables are really, really important, and they have been for a number of years. And what they do is give the students the chance not only to fill in the survey, but there's a place where they can do comments as well. So as a normal part of our academic processes, we take account of all the grades that every course gets, because it's graded on course, not university. Every course, the grades that they get, the breakdown of every one of those grades that the course gets, but also the feedback that students give as well. So students know that they have this chance to feedback. So at Falmouth, for instance, our assessment and feedback was quite good, 79%, but it's still 5% higher than the UK average. So we do feedback quite well, but we could do it better. 79% is okay, still 5% above the average, but still could be much, much better. So also, on top of this, almost to try and control this, we have for every module we deliver at Falmouth, and most universities have the same thing, we have a module evaluation. So when the students get to the end of the module, they gave us evaluation. And they give it us exactly in the same way that they would do if they were doing the NSS. So it starts to prepare them for the questions of the NSS, but also that structure is quite a good structure. So when we get all that feedback from the students, what we do is we have a cut-off point, it's out of 5 for everything, And when anything gets below 4, you have to do an action plan of how you get above 4. And that's across every course, across the university, and also we can see, because obviously data is data, we can see which courses are doing well, how much resource we spend on a module, how much teaching's on that module, and the quality of feedback and the quality of assessment. So in response to value for money, in response to students having power and gravitas, what the universities have had to do is really respond to this and really try and invest in understanding where the weak spots are and what the best ways of doing assessment and feedback are. So for instance, this is from a module of feedback evaluation 2016, and this is what a student said. A student said, the assessment of this module was misleading from the beginning. We were invited to undertake work experience. This inevitably affected our studio work, which I did not know actually made up the 50% of the module. So this is a student saying, we've done this module, student experience was an opportunity, we did it, and it wasn't said to us beforehand what was the percentages and what was the emphasis for that module. And all we want is a clarity to know before what that is. Now I know the university may be moving away from a very, very concrete clarity, but that doesn't matter, because if you've got to reach the learning outcomes, you have a plan of how to reach that learning outcomes, and you always have to let the students know from the beginning what they're going to be assessed on. That's something we've learned in the UK sector, is all students want is clarity. It's this percentage, it's this weight, it's this thing, and this is what we've got to hand in. And as long as we know beforehand, we're happy.
So I have a question. Is it mandatory for students to fill in the feedback?
To fill out the feedback? That's a very good question. So I'm quite evil. So I make them, I don't give them their grades till they filled out the feedback, which some students get very upset by, but I say, I want your feedback. So when you fill the feedback in, you can have your grades. And so that means that I get 95% feedback. Some of it, they say, we don't want to give feedback, but very few, and in fact, it's very positive feedback. So that's the way I do it. Sorry.
Excuse me. Yes, so what about the attendance? Student attendance.
Student?
Attendance.
Attendance is very good at Falmouth, but I'll talk about that as well in a minute. So at Falmouth we have 2 campuses. Falmouth's a very small town next to the sea, and there's not much else to do but go to university. So our attendance is fantastic, and also in some ways we focus on what that attendance has to happen. So I recently did, I won't mention which university it was, but I did a 5-year validation of a big fashion university in London. You can probably guess. And I was really struck by the fact that some of the students hadn't seen other students by the time they got to their 3rd year. Because the travel between the different campuses, the fact that they could choose what to go to, what not to go to, meant that the attendance was very variable. At Falmouth, it's not variable, it's very good, and we have things in place when it's not so good. We also are developing, and it's gone through a pilot stage, digital attendance. So you may have this already where you can just, and this already connects to the timetable, so you can see who's there. Sorry, there was a question here.
My question actually is answered now. I just wanted to know, when do you take the feedback? It's like from the 1st year onwards, or after each module?
Yeah.
Or is it every semester? Like in India, we have to, the year is divided into 2.
Yeah.
So we take feedback on a semester basis.
Yeah.
So you take after every course?
But every course is in a semester.
Yeah.
So we just have every course, or we call them modules,
Yes.
runs for one semester, stops, and then runs for the second semester. So we take it straight after the semester. Yeah.
And it's more qualitative from what I see.
It's not qualitative.
It's quantitative.
It's quantitative, i.e. they give a grade, but it's qualitative where every section they can leave some qualitative feedback. Okay? Good. So Falmouth, we have some courses that do very, very well on assessment and feedback. So our creative advertising has 95%, interior design has 93%, sustainable product design 90%, and then English with creative writing. So as part of our good practice, we've gone to those courses and tried to ask them why you think your assessment and feedback is good. Some of it's useful, some of it's not. So in our NSS, National Student Survey in 2016, this was a comment that we had, really well organised, and staff keep students well informed. Assessment feedback is really detailed, and staff make it clear what needs to be improved and also recognise what you're doing well. So that was feedback, but I think that holds a lot of what assessment should be, in that it's really detailed. They make it clear what needs to be improved, i.e. it's constructive, and you also can recognise what you're doing well from it. So even though that's really straightforward. So assessing creative practice is quite interesting, isn't it? Because some people could say that it's very, very subjective, the things that we do. So I don't know, I'm sure there are some courses where you do take exams, but actually in Falmouth University there's no exams. So it's all on assessment in front of portfolio, in front of work. Now, my experience says, and it's quite a strange experience, I don't agree that it's subjective at all. I think it's very objective. You've got learning outcomes, you've got something in front of you, you've got experienced people. I used to do little experiments, and I used to make people do it blind. So I'd send somebody off, send somebody off, send somebody off, bring them together, and every single time it was about the same. So I think we should be a little bit more explicit about saying this isn't just a glint in the tutor's eye. This isn't just whether you like students or not, or whether you like a certain type of fashion. Actually, we're very good at assessing portfolio and assessing portfolio to learning outcomes. And I think we should be a little bit more explicit about that it's not soft, it's not a lottery, but maybe it would be a good idea to do a little more experiments. I know you'll do blind assessment anyway, but to do more experiment, to just have pieces of work, to get it assessed, find out what the elements were, make sure that it's being assessed against learning outcomes, and then getting some data to support the fact so that students are clear that it's not a lottery. I think that's important. So there's a tension between how we measure students in a creative environment. People will perform more creatively if they're motivated by interest in the activity itself rather than the promise of rewards and treats. So we want the creative process that they're involved in to be something that they're involved in. It's not about the grade you're going to get or some treat you're going to get, but we know that our creative students, when they're involved in something, it takes off. So it's really important that that activity should be creative. The problems with assessment are that there's a kind of bewilderment with creative pedagogy. Sometimes we have this mystique around our learning outcomes around creativity that confuses students. That confuses students. It's about
this magic thing creative, or it's about this magic dust that you put on this thing and it suddenly, it's not, is it? It's about good construction, it's about good materials, choice of materials, it's about understanding the research, it's about understanding the context, the customer, and then doing something special, but that special is within confines. So let's demystify the creativity around the pedagogy. And pedagogy means, you know, the system we have for teaching and education. The higher fee-paying environment in the UK context complicates things. It's like, where's my value for money? We're doing this thing and you're asking me to do this silly thing. I want to do the real thing. And that sometimes creates tensions. Higher student numbers. So obviously the universities, there was an explosion in the UK with university numbers. More students coming. Obviously we employed more and more people and we kept student-staff ratio. Our student-staff ratio is about 15, probably similar to yours. But students always perceive that more and more students are coming and that they're not getting the special attention. Greater student expectations, so students expect more. So this assessment, I want to know how I can be a fashion designer, and you're dealing with it in a very compartmentalised way. So they almost want to expect, even in the first year, to be doing the thing. Increasingly diverse student population, so how I mentioned before that people are coming from all kinds of different backgrounds. I was the first person in my family to go to university, so I remember what it was like to not know what it is to be at university, to not know all those codes and etiquettes, to not know, to not have a mother and a grandfather to have gone to university. So are we, with that diverse student population, are we making it open and accessible for that student population? And we should think about that. And also the transition from school to university is a huge thing. So I don't know whether it's the same in India, but in the UK, students are much more, or become less resilient. Okay, so they get fed things to get good grades, get tested to get good grades, and maybe they don't have the resilience to start a university course, because a university course is, emphasis is on you, we're going to help you and support you, but we need to see you showing the resilience, showing the aptitude, showing the autonomy, and we actually haven't got the time if you don't do that, so people get lost in that, and it's no fault of their own because their school experience up till then hasn't been resilient. If you're showing some form of something, we'll give you something. If you're doing something, we'll give you something. Now, I don't know anything about that, so I'm talking rubbish, so don't take any notice, but I do see students who are finding more and more difficult to be resilient. So we need to do something about that. And we need to make sure that our assessment, in this case, is taking account of that. Your first assessment in the first year should take account of the students are not used to being criticised. So we have to be positively critical with our criticism. And also students chasing marks as assessment junkies. You know, oh, what am I going to do to get my A's or my 100% or my, you know, they're chasing the grade rather than chasing the experience. Now, in the UK, because it's costing them so much, there's already this idea that if you get anything less than a 2-1, a higher second degree, you've wasted your time and you've wasted €27,000. So people want that 2-1 or first, and if it goes down to a 2-2 or a third, they're absolutely distraught. So assessment has got to lead people on to realise that what they're doing is good, and they shouldn't be assessment junkies, but it's very difficult, of course. And also the new modes of delivery. We're always introducing new modes of delivery, whether it's blended learning, whether it's... And are we sure that our assessment is taking account of those? and really understanding the modes that we're introducing. That's an important part. So it's bewildering, you know, students are caught in the crossfire. They don't realise what this creative pedagogy is. Students are chasing grades. In the UK, we've got something new, which is called the Teaching Excellence Framework. Did anybody hear about it? No. So in the UK, we've always had, since the 1980s, a research excellence framework. So it's an audit of our research. So every 5 years, we submit our research, all the outputs of the research, everybody who's ever done any research, and we get a grading of 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, 1-star, and a place within the research community in every university across the UK. It's a little bit of a clunky process, but it does then give universities a chance to get more research because they prove that they have a certain calibre with research. So last year, the government brought in the same thing for our teaching. So they said, we're a bit annoyed that so many Russell Group universities, so many of the top universities, excuse me, are focusing so much on research, and students are there for the teaching, so we're going to bring in the same audit for teaching. We're going to call it the Teaching Excellent Framework. So it recognises and rewards excellent learning and teaching.
If I go back to your, NSS and TEF, how authentic or seriously students take that? Because we, not always, but there are always the cases where I think they don't respond more responsibly.
Yes. So the question can have two sides. One is the Delhi, do they take it seriously when they're questioned? Actually they do, because I think that they are connected to this value for money and they want to, give a proper feedback. But the TEF is a good point, because the TEF was introduced last year. Every university has an award, but we're not finding the students are taking it that seriously yet. They know about it, but they don't know. It's now going to go to course level. So there's going to be a course level TEF. So instead of the university getting an award, every course within the university will get an award. So it's a kind of way that we're showing that we're taking the teaching seriously, but it also has lots of problems. So Falmouth got gold, I'll tell you now, I'm glad about that. My job wouldn't have been worth having if we hadn't. So we were the top 20% of universities to get gold. And the reason we did was that we do have good widening participation, we have good Delhi, our NSS has been good, and on all fronts that they were measuring, we had good results. Not brilliant, and the idea was that you get gold if you don't have any negative in all the metrics. If you have 1, it can push you down to silver. If you have 2, it can push you down to bronze. So luckily, we had no negative metrics across all the things we were being measured, and that's destinations, i.e. jobs, students' response to the course, or our quality, salaries, widening participation, the amount of non-white students at the university which we measured on, etc., etc. So it's been a very full and quite a good, I must say. The metrics we got were very good. So it was from all kinds of different, and everybody obviously tried to find a hole, but they couldn't. They're old metrics, so they were always from a year or 2 before, but it was quite good. And also on attainment, so whether your students came in with a certain level and left with a higher level. So they managed to progress while they were at the university. So there's lots of metrics involved in that. So that's obviously, we look at that as well, because what they're doing in the next TEF is they're making sure that there isn't grade inflation. So grade inflation, of course, is where more and more students get 2-1s and firsts, and fewer students. There's not the full range of grades for the final degree and the marks up to that. So they know that it's easier for universities to just give higher and higher degrees because the students want it. We need to. There's a lot of pressure. TEF's making us do that. So they've got to stop grade inflation as well. So that's another, let's say, pressure, but also in lots of ways a very good thing that universities have had to respond to, because we've got to have said, yeah, well, what is our widening participation? How do we get students from different backgrounds in? Cornwall is very white, so how do we make sure that students from lots of different diverse backgrounds and ethnicity come to our university, and how do we support that? How do we make sure that our curriculum is international, not just for international students coming in, but UK students to realise that there's a bigger world out there than the UK and Falmouth. So there's lots of learning points that we've had just from the TEF to make sure and check ourselves that we're doing the things that we want to do and need to do. So, next one, current trends in assessment practice. So, we have something in the UK, and I'm sure you've got the equivalent, and it's called the Quality Assurance Agency. So what that does is, it gives us a quality code for all our different disciplines. For art and design, we have a quality code, and it's about what we should be assessing against. Now, in the UK, you'll have a quality code for art and design, and what you should be doing when you're doing a validated new course is making sure that the DNA of that code is in your validated course. Because essentially, at the different levels, you should be making sure that the student who comes out of an art and design course ultimately reaches what the QAA agency deems is responsible. You'll have one of those for dentistry, one for the medics, one for creative advertising, I think. So the art and design is split into some different ones. But it might be worth just having a quick look at those and just seeing what our ideas are. I'll find those and make sure that you get those as well.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think I came across one, but they were not part of the university. It was the independent.
So the QAA is independent.
Because they approached,
yeah,
us and then.
But we have our license from the QAA. So a university can't be a university unless it meets the QAA thing. So that's why we have to play ball. Okay? And as I say, I'll give you all these slides. So assessment is concerned with making judgments about students making work. So that's our job in a way, is we're making judgments about their work. So you're not assessing the person or their potential or where they're from or what they like or whether they're in the gang or out of the gang. You're assessing the work. It's really important to assess the work in front of you. So Phil Race in 2017 said, we need to change assessment. It doesn't work well and has got out of control, which is an interesting thing to me. It's got out of control. It's not what we need it to be. We have something called the HEA, Higher Education Academy, which is now called Advancement HE. It's changed its name, but we'll call it. So they say assessment practice is in most universities has not kept pace with the vast changes in the context, aims and structure of higher education. They can no longer do justice to the outcomes we expect from a university education in relation to wide-ranging knowledge, skills and employability. So that's the HEA saying, look at your assessment criteria and make sure that it's in line with everything you're trying to achieve. is it in line with your university strategy? Are you checking that you're testing the things you want to test? Or have you just left your assessment criteria because it's easier not to change it? So another piece of research said universities face substantial change in rapidly evolving global context. The challenges of meeting new expectations about academic standards in the next decade and beyond mean that assessment will need to be rethought and renewed. Okay, so these are the key trends impacting assessment practice in the UK. That's what I know at the moment. So we're changing the NSS, the questions around assessment and feedback, sorry, that should say 2017. The focus on compliance with academic standards, TEF. Increasing emphasis on the quality of assessment. Increasing emphasis on inclusive methods of assessment. So I'll talk about this later in the week. Have you got an inclusive approach to your curriculum and education? Are you using the tools in an inclusive way? Are you making it accessible for all students? And do they all understand what's happening? So inclusivity we'll talk about in a minute. Using digital solutions to enhance assessment efficiency. So if we are using those tools, are we making sure that the assessment's keeping up with it? We're also trying to reduce the quantity of assessment. So maybe it's the same at your university. Students do get assessed to death. And it is good to decrease assessment, but are we making sure that students are getting the quality of assessment they need at those key points if we've reduced it? It's important. And also the subject-specific pedagogy, for example, studio-based work. Are we making sure that the assessment is fair, accessible and reasonable? So there's some good places to look for good practice. So the University of the Arts London, Professor Susan Orr did a whole piece around assessment practice in the creative arts, which is a very nice place to look, and you can see the link from this. So she says that assessment plays a fundamental role in the learning experience, and that our pedagogy is distinctive. So they include how we assess creative process and the outcomes, as well as encouraging risk-taking within the assessment. So my line with assessment is that you can write whatever you want as a learning outcome. Too many times I see learning outcomes where the learning outcomes are just straightforwardly boring. So what can sometimes happen is that you have learning outcomes and then you have what you really want the student to do. And they're two very separate things. In fact, I've seen people bring the real project from under the desk and not actually assess against the learning outcomes. And my line is, just write the learning outcomes to be what you want them to be. And if risk is part of the learning outcomes, that you want students to take risk, and you're going to assess them on their management of risk, then put it in the learning outcome. Don't expect them to just creatively take risk when it's not written in the learning outcomes. So I think we should look at the learning outcomes as an opportunity not to do the plain, just boring things that you would assess, the default things, but write them in a way that gets the student towards the projects and the ways of learning and the education that you want them to have. I don't know whether that makes sense, but I do think that I have to often catch academics and say, why are you writing those learning outcomes? Well, we thought that's what you wanted. I don't want anything. I want you to write them to be in line with your discipline. And whatever that takes, if there's risk in there, write it in there. So these include how we foster formative assessment through self and peer review in distinctive learning contexts such as a studio, community or workplace. I'm going to give a little bit of an example later in the week of my own curriculum reform and what we did. And one of the things we did was to say you can only assess against 3 learning outcomes, no more. And some departments and courses said we've got 7, we've got 8, we've got 9. I said, well, if you need to assess more, do it formatively earlier in the project or earlier in the assessment cycle. Now, we do know through research that that formative assessment is only good. Students appreciate it, they learn well by it, it gives them great pointers to where they need to go, and it moves a little bit away from the grade junkie at them, where they're just waiting for it at the end. So all formative assessment is good. So we need to find ways of promoting formative assessment and ways of giving formative assessment, and actually by limiting the amount of learning outcomes, it pushes some of that onto the formative assessment. So normally people write assessment on a form and give that assessment back. Is that the way you do it? You can also audio record it, you can do a small video, you can do. So we're using all of these formats. Some of them, I must say, are creating more complications than not. But it's important that if you're dealing with visual people all the time, to all the time be getting text-based ones is quite difficult for the student and sometimes the staff. So are there some more creative ways that we can give assessment feedback beyond smiley faces? Smiley faces don't give a really good idea. And how we give meaningful feedback that will develop the student's creative practice at foundation, undergraduate and postgraduate levels. So how does the assessment increase? What's your strategy? We need to make sure that it's appropriate for the levels that the students are teaching at, and taking in nuances like the first assessment in the first year when students don't have the tools to deal with assessment. So, improved potential for student learning. Why is transforming assessment important? Why do we need to transform assessment? Improved potential for student learning. That's the basic one, isn't it? If we can use it as a tool, we know it's really important to the student and it improves their learning, then it's important. Increase student satisfaction. If they get assessment which is constructive, meaningful, aligned with what they were doing, then they're more satisfied. Increase value for money. If they're saying, well, everything seems to be on the grades, and I don't see anybody taking much time or effort in assessment, then they'll feel as if they're getting more value for money. Increase sustainability of assessment methods. So we don't want everybody to invent their own assessment methods across the university. We want there to be a clarity around what assessment is and how you give it, even if there's lots of different forms, so that the student may, in an interdisciplinary, move from one department to another, and their assessment experience is the same, and that's important. Fairer representation of a student attainment, so it's fairer. Students see it as fair. If they're not doing so well, they see that they're not doing so well. They have explanation of what they need to do to improve, but they see it as fair. Greater confidence in academic standards. So when students get to the end of the degree and you say, did it seem fair all the way through? Did the people get the right grades at the end? They go, yeah, I understood it, I took part in it, I did my best, and it seemed fair, and I've got confidence in that. And also that it is subject specific, so that they feel as if it's not something coming down from on high in different environments. If you're in a lab situation with the sciences, or out in the field with the medics, or in a studio situation, it's appropriate for that pedagogy. Yes, I'm going to stop there, 10 minutes break. How long do we have left in total? Okay, so what I want to do is just carry on, finish the assessment with some examples at the end. We're almost finished the assessment practice. we've got 3 or 4 short videos then that just talk about some of the good practice in Falmouth. Some of it might be relevant, some not. I do need to plug the sound in. So yeah. So I'll carry on, and then when we get to that, maybe we've got the speakers then. So, how are universities improving assessment practice? Well, in some ways, it's the forces that are on us. So, increasing emphasis on the professional recognition. So, this idea of, you know, if you're going to be an architect, you've got to make sure that the architecture bodies agree with your assessment practice. There's more and more bodies and professional bodies that are important to different levels of university students, therefore assessment practice becomes more important. Growth in accredited teaching courses, so we have our own postgraduate certificate in education, I'm sure you have equivalents of. So it's, we need for those postgraduate certifications to deal with assessment practice. We need to publish module guides which incorporate an assessment strategy. So this is to say that every student who's on a module knows already what the module is, know what the aims and goals are, know what they're being assessed against, and know what that strategy is for that module. How do all these individual modules link up to be their education, which is essentially what they are. And also writing assessment briefs which are clear and consistent in language and terminology. So I think there's also another thing, which is engaging students with the learning outcomes right at the start of their education, but also at the start of the module. Just say, listen, this is what you're going to be assessed against. Let's talk about them. Let's make sure you understand them. And just making sure that it's clear from the beginning. And also engaging with students as partners. That's a big one to put in as the last bullet point. But that's something that we have found more and more of, is that we, you know, if there's some question we ask ourselves, 99 times out of 100 we would just try and answer it. Now we'll go and do a focus group with students, really ask them, and actually they're the experts. They're the experts in their own education. They know what the stresses and strains are, and they can help us with this. So to treat students more as partners than just customers. So assessment is influenced by and in partnership with various stakeholders, from professional accreditation that I've already said, to compliance with academic standards, QAA, that I've already mentioned, and engagements with students. So it's important to see assessment not just as a small cog detail, but this assessment should engage with all stakeholders and be talked about with all stakeholders, and make sure that everybody understands that this important point in the pyramid is there. I'll not go into this, but NUS Assessment and Feedback Benchmarking Tool, they've produced one, so maybe that's interesting to have a look at. NUS is our National Union of Students, and they're the ones behind the NSS, the National Students Survey. So I'm also not going to go into the regulations, but everybody has a way of checking their own assessment process. So you'll have regulations around that. And I think it's important for us, we have assessment requirements, we have assessment deadlines, publication of results, reassessment, late assessment, retention of student work. It's important that everybody knows what those rules are. And again, students, it's clear what they and how they are judged by those. And, you know, those are our policies. So I'm going to go on to the case studies. And I'm going to look at some key issues. Those key issues are, what is assessment? describe how it works in your area.
I'm sorry, in the last slide you talked about retention of student work. So
Yeah.
are you talking about informing the students that their work will be there, or is it something about the creative autonomy of the students, whether the university can use that work, or what exactly is it?
I actually was talking about it that so the external assessor can see it, and which work you retain for them to see. So you'll keep work from different. But there is the question about who owns the work. We in the UK are becoming much clearer about it, that the student owns the work at undergraduate, and then we develop things further at postgraduate. But we're trying to say quite clearly, you own the work at undergraduate. So the key issues: what is assessment? Describe how it works in your area. What are the challenges involved in assessing creative subjects? What are the best assessment methods? What is your approach to learning outcomes and assessment criteria? What is the relationship between assessment and feedback? So these are the observations from the academic staff. So terminology and understanding, end gaming, i.e. looking for getting grades rather than fully partaking in the project, time for assessment, rewarding risk in the creative practice, holistic assessment rather than must-pass elements, importance of informative assessment, assessing group assignments, and self-assessment. So I have 4 short videos now. I'll set the videos up and then we'll test them.
Alex, who's responsible for doing this for this program? The teaching staff? Or there is a separate...
Yeah, we have something called Quality Assurance and Enhancement, and they're involved, but it's a partnership with the team, the academic team. So we work alongside. There's rules and regs, and the quality team do some of it, but then others do some, so it's a partnership really. We don't have something that just flies in and does it all. Let's see where I can get this. So this is a short video, 3-minute video on terminology and understanding. So just again, we asked our academics, usually we ask the academics in the best assessing and see whether it makes sense. Some of it might not make sense and some of it might be Falmouth specific, but let's see whether it makes sense. No sound. I think it might have been that I didn't have any sound. Let's also try and see.
At the start of the study block, we all do a presentation which is, okay, this is the study block, this is it.
Well, the sound suddenly went. Was there and then it went. I'll just leave it. Oh, that's just the jacket.
And as we present the projects, so the projects is within the modules, we
Okay, good. So hopefully, again, I can let you have these videos. There's no problem if you don't get a chance to see it or hear it or want to look at it again.
at the start of the study block, we all do a presentation which is, okay, this is the study block, this is the expectation of how the time is going to be used across that period of time. And then we talk about assessment, and at that point you're going to reach and you're going to submit a body of work. We will bring up the module information forms and we'll talk about the content of that, so how the learning outcomes are placed against the benchmark assessment criteria. And so that's the initial conversation about the module information form is linked to the module, to the assessment criteria, and as we present the projects, so the projects is within the modules, we talk about learning outcomes linked to the particular project and the stages that they will go through regarding the learning outcomes. So you'll complete the project with that presentation again. So it's constantly reinforcing it in a more formal way as a presentation to the whole year group. Within learning teams we do that, so we meet them weekly. So we're always meeting our students, a small group of students, usually 5 to 6 students in a group, and we'll discuss the project's progress. And within that, we'll be talking about, okay, well, this is stage 1 of the learning outcome, which is, say, discovery, so it's research stage. So it's constantly reinforced in a formal but also informal discussion.
I mean, I think the thing with the graphic assessment process, the assessment criteria, is it's linked to the design process. They are one and the same. So with our assessment process, it leads you through discovery, idea generation, critical reflection, design proposal, project management, and working with others. And so that mirrors exactly the assessment process, and that mirrors how designers work in industry. And so that assessment criteria shouldn't just be a measuring tool, it should be a helpful tool to be in your process and practices throughout your life beyond university. So I think that the assessment criteria isn't just about giving a mark, the assessment criteria is about giving guidelines about what to do next. The learning outcomes are different for each module. So although the assessment criteria is the same for all 3 years, from day 1 to the day that they leave, they're working with the same assessment criteria, so they become familiar with it, they understand where they are, what they need to do. The learning outcomes for each module vary, and we again kind of worked quite hard with the learning outcomes to kind of craft them into very short, accessible sentences. They're not over-wordy, so that there is a real understanding of this is it, this is what you need to achieve, and this is the level at which you can achieve it at. And so there is a kind of clear understanding of what they need to do, and then the assessment criteria dictates how well they're doing it.
So hopefully that's a quick description of the way that they're trying to use not the learning outcomes of this weird thing that happens at the end, that students go, what's that? They're using the vocabulary with the learning outcomes all the way through in the formal situations and the informal situations, and trying to write learning outcomes that are short, accessible and understandable, so that students really can always be locating them, but also that they're trying to explain how they all fit into the bigger education, either for that year or the full 3 years. And I think that's an important one as well. Okay? Second one. This is about holistic assessment, so bringing everything together at the end rather than splitting things off.
So holistic assessment is where students produce a body of work that responds to their own specific individual interests, plays to their strengths. They're not assessed in terms of a specific number of outputs or following a brief. We assess them according to a set of criteria that are very generic. So those criteria are ideas and intentions, forms and materials, critical reflection and evaluation, imagination and creativity, and professional context. And they produce work that follows their own direction. So for assessment, a student would submit a portfolio of work. There'd be a number of finished, completed pieces, there'd be work in progress, developmental work, sketchbooks, journals. We'd expect that they are clearly showing the development of their ideas, their experiments with form, with materials, making evident what their critical contexts are. So students are assessed by the staff team towards the end of each study block. The students are briefed at the beginning, and at the end they organise a display of work. It can either be in the studio, on the walls and on the floor or whatever. Staff then go around each of the students' work with a set of criteria and assess that entire body of work. The criteria aren't weighted, so we're looking at the whole body of work and assessing it according to those criteria, but in general. The benefits of this kind of holistic approach for staff, for example, is that we're able, during the study block, to work with the students in a genuine way, helping them to develop their creative practice, to help them research, to help them understand ways in which they can articulate what's going on in their work, their ideas, their intentions, to give attention to the forms and materials that they're working with in a very considered way. It means that we give each student individual attention with the confidence that we are working as well to the legitimate assessment criteria.
We use formative and summative assessment, and students are kind of really engaged through their learning team models to embrace formative models of assessment and are given assessment sheets which are identical to staff assessment sheets in order to run peer-to-peer group self-evaluation models. And that makes the conversations between staff and students very flat, because there is no difference in language, there is no difference in template, and there's no ambiguity about the methods that are being used. And I think that helps keep it on a level playing field. And you know, we decided that actually standardising those was a really good thing to do for our sanity, but also for student kind of clarity. And then we kind of evolved that into a system of thinking, well, you know, we all have a high proportion of visual-based learners on the courses. What ways could we kind of make the assessment forms more fun, if you can do that? And we thought, why don't we try out using some graph-based methods like spider diagrams? And in order to make that really seamless, we started to use quite old-school triplicate kind of methods, where we would have a paper copy that the student would fill in, and then tracing paper copies that would overlay that, so that the peer group could do one, and then staff could do one. And we could all be assessing the work at the same time, but then the conversation could be about compiling those different layers of understanding and different opinions, and having a conversation about the differences. Because I think in those differences comes better understanding about the deliverables that are required. And that's just really made it an enjoyable conversation, rather than it feeling like it's us and them, we're marking, they're handing in work. It's much more kind of holistic. And you know, I think that's one of the main kind of successes to self-evaluation that we do.
So that's an interesting one, because we all do elements of self-assessment, but if you can turn it into, like, there's your self-assessment, we are doing the real assessment now, we can turn it into a multi-layered thing where it all counts, it's all important. I think that's very interesting. And then the last one is on group work.
Nobody acts on their own, or as we used to say, actors who act on their own always look like they're acting on their own. But on a more serious level, I mean, acting is a collaborative practice. It is also a highly relatory practice, and that has to be built into assessing both the individual's work, but also the individual within the group or the collective work. It can be a little bit tricky. There are a couple of models that we've used. One model is particularly in the area of devised work, or any work that involves making on the part of the actors. They can be given a group mark across the board, where every individual will get the same mark, a group mark. But then added to that, we've looked at the idea of having what we call a framing statement, which is maybe 1,000 words piece of documentation that each individual would submit, that would allow them the opportunity to speak a little bit about their process, not just the outcome, the product of what they were doing. And that then gives us the opportunity to adjust an individual's mark that they received as a group mark up or down by probably 5%. So that model is okay, it's not without its problems. For example, in that module that we trialed that way of working on, there were many instances where the framing statements didn't actually shed any light on the work, and therefore we didn't feel a need to adjust the marks in any way, which kind of made the framing statement feel a little bit arbitrary. The second model is to assess both the group work and the individual's work. So, for example, in the final year production, which would be the third year graduate production, we would set out a series of criteria. Probably the majority, maybe 80% of that criteria would be geared towards the individual, from their use of body, voice, kind of psychophysical engagement, imaginative engagement, etc. Those kind of criteria, and maybe 20% would be geared towards the group work. I would look at things like dramaturgical choices, production value, etc. And then their final grade would come out of that. And that second module that I've mentioned, that's one that I think we'd retain because it can be used pretty much across the board for any kind of practical performative assessment. But there are instances where students get so obsessed with the mark that they end game themselves, as it were, and they kind of they overshoot themselves, and they're basically they take themselves out of the process in order to achieve a result. And it's very hard to explain to students that, in fact, if they commit to the process, they are much more likely to get the result that they want. For me, it's about keeping their attention on the process. It's about keeping them in the moment of the doing and the moment of the learning. It's about holding them in that learning space in the present. A huge part of artistic practice is about risk-taking, which in a way seems almost paradoxical or contradictory to, meeting very clear kind of tick boxes for aims and outcomes. It appears to the student that they don't go hand in hand, and I guess they see that as perhaps almost a conflicting message. But if the aims and outcomes for the modules are well enough thought through and well enough articulated, they should encapsulate both of those aspects.
Okay, so that just summarises some of the things we've been talking about. Okay, that's part 2 finished. So now we're going to go on to part 3. I hope this is all okay with everybody. There's enough. Obviously, some of it's very UK specific. I don't want to come across saying in any way the UK system or approach is the way, and it's not. So, but I'm just putting it in a context, because then that will allow you to reflect on your own processes, which probably will be much better than our processes. So I'm now going to go to the next one, which will be and again, I'll speed through some of this. I think we've got 45 minutes, and I do want to show some of the examples along the way. So I'll be quite quick, but obviously when you get this presentation, if you want to have a look at it and some of the references, you can do as well. So just to say that this is the feedback session is supposed to take 90 minutes, but it won't do. So what is feedback? Feedback is integral to assessment. It's a dialogic learning and teaching process. Its principles can ensure consistent practice and help students use feedback as an aid to learning. So that's what feedback is. So, according to the Re-Engineering Assessment Practices body, good feedback practice should ultimately empower. They suggest the following to ensure that this is embedded, so that the empowerment: clarify what good performance is, the goals, the criteria, the standards. Facilitate the development of reflection and self-assessment in learning, something we've looked at already. Deliver high-quality feedback to students that enables them to self-correct. Encourage dialogue around learning, peer and tutor students, so don't just deliver feedback and think that that's it. The dialogue around it is really important. Encourage positive motivational beliefs and self-esteem, so it should be constructive in this way. Provide opportunities to act on feedback, so check your feedback that it's not just a cul-de-sac, a dead end, that people have something that they can do. And provide information that teachers can use to help share their teaching. So one of the things is that feedback is authentic. So that's an interesting word, isn't it? So students respond most if they feel it's authentic. So authentic feedback is measured by intellectual accomplishments that are worthwhile, significant and meaningful. So it should be something that they feel they've accomplished when they've done it. And this could include assessment taking place and feedback sought through a rubric by which their performance is evaluated, or peer feedback to evaluate and improve the student insight. So really make sure that it's not one-dimensional, that you're giving the students multi-dimensional chances to respond to the feedback. Make sure that it's timely. Do you have a reg that says that feedback has to be back with the students within a certain time?
Yes.
Yes. Do you keep to it? Because I know in my university there is a rule of 3 weeks, and people do and then they don't. And I think it's a contract with the students to make sure that it does. In fact, at one validation of one of our best courses, I won't say which course it was, the students on the validation of their own course said, oh yeah, we don't get written feedback. I said, what? How come you don't? He said, oh well, tutors said, do you want more of the good stuff we do, or do you want written feedback? Because we can't do both, we've not got enough time. So students said, well, strangely enough, more of the good stuff that we do. So, but the problem was they were getting feedback verbally, and then it was lost with them, or they didn't. So it's important, even if it does take time, to make sure that that feedback's there and it's on time. So we have research that's done to say that if you wait more than 5 weeks to receive feedback, it becomes less and less meaningful. We at Falmouth have a rule that it's got to be within 3 weeks. And then that's the policy around that, is that it's got to be within 3 weeks, and it's 3 calendar weeks of the assessment deadline. So we also say in our policy that students shall experience both formative and assessments. That's within our regs. So that's another thing that we need to work on, is to make sure that it's not just a final assessment, you get formative as well. And also it's in our regs that feedback should be appropriate and constructive, and it must include a face-to-face feedback as well. So we include things in there to make sure that feedback is developed a certain way. Now obviously feedback is expensive, isn't it? So I sometimes have academics who say, I'm responsible for 35 students and I have to give feedback to each one. That means I can only do this amount. But actually feedback is the really important touchstone with the students. So we have to make sure it's constructive, timely, but we also have to make sure that students feel as if they're getting constructive feedback, and that where possible is face-to-face as well. And we also, they need to receive a variety of feedback. So if it's always in the same format written, then that doesn't help. And it must also explain how the grade was arrived, and then provide counselling on how to improve. So I think those are the elements of feedback that are important. The formative feedback is important, as we've already said, because it's an opportunity for students to judge how well they're doing against the requirements of the course, to allow time to reflect and improve before the final submission, or close the gap. And formative tends to be effective because students take more notice of it. It provides an opportunity to improve and influence the grade. So if you talk about formative, this is a chance for us to close that gap, then students really, they almost take more notice of it than the final assessment. So the summative, the final assessment. Summative assessment is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark and to give a grade. And very importantly, as part of this, feed forward. So the general phrase is not sufficient, but comments on specific strengths, acts, advice for the future as it promotes the strengthening of skills and attributes for future use. So we try and say feedback is important, but feed forward is the most important. How do you give them the pointers and do better in the next module? So a few strategies for improving feedback: refining traditional feedback, so refocus written feedback, faster feedback, pro forma feedback, whole class feedback, online and e-feedback, audio and video feedback, screencast, using personal response systems. So there's all different ways of refining that traditional way. So involve students in feedback, so self-generated feedback, peer feedback, co-revising assignments, editing and redrafting, and interacting with students, engaging with criteria, feedback loops in undergraduate projects, assessment dialogues, reviewing progress with students, optimizing feedback in postgraduate supervision. So the national strategies, and this comes from HEA, NSS and TEF, are that you've got to make it worth their while. Seems very straightforward, but make it worth their while. Give them information that makes it worth a while. Build activities focusing on feedback into class or tutorial time. So build things around the feedback that make it more relevant. Be seen to monitor whether students are reading and acting on feedback. It's okay giving feedback, but if students think, well, they don't even, doesn't make any sense whether I do this or not, is also a problem. And involve students in actively doing something with the feedback. Give audio feedback with the grades at the end. So don't start with the grades, do it at the end, because you want people to listen. There's a very nice story of one of our heads who gave 45 minutes worth of feedback to a student, and then they were walking out and he followed them, and there were two students together, and he heard one student say to the other, so how was your feedback? And the other student who had the feedback said 75%. So it was all on the grade. So, give feedback without or before marks, as we've said. Embed some dialogue with students within your feedback process. So if you are having a conversation with them and the student is, then make sure that's in the feedback so it's relevant. Let feedback from one stage of an assessment feed into the next. So if you've said something from the last time, say something about that this time. Make sure your feedback is worth reading, and make sure your feedback is high profile, so it's not just the basics. Okay, so there are some connections there. I want to show just a short video now on feedback, and this is from a tutor's point of view. Let me get to the right thing.
Our staff have been doing this, by that I mean giving feedback on work on advertising solutions, for at least 15 years of their careers. So there's a lot of experience there, and that's prior to even obviously the academic profession. There isn't a sort of an absolute wrong and an absolute right. There are degrees of effectiveness or likely effectiveness. There's no algorithm for right and wrong. There are kind of degrees, and experience tells us when something is more likely, an advertising or communication solution is more likely to be successful within the target market. Experience tells us that. And then, as you see, we're in the studios, and so there will be a workshop, and we move to the sort of application stage of that principle. And that's when they're actually creating communication solutions of their own. And we as tutors essentially work the room. So we'll sit with the students and move around the room and do it like that. So it's not recorded, because what we're doing is we're looking at very individual pieces of work, very individual solutions. Every solution is going to be different. and we're feeding back to the individual based on their individual solutions. Again, it's about examining the work and giving them some guidance in terms of where to go. It's not, again, a sort of an absolute right or an absolute wrong.
And the summative feedback is quite detailed.
We provide feedback sheets and then we do a face-to-face session if required. And so they're more interested, I think, in what it is that they can do to make their work better rather than an absolute number. You know, as I said, I don't think this is. It's very difficult to quantify. I think it's more about guidance and not saying you're currently here, which is a 2-2. We're saying you're currently here and you might want to consider moving there. We don't tell them. We don't give them the answers. We give them a kind of gentle nudge in the right direction. Students learn at different paces, and they have different abilities to deal with criticism. So we get to know them quite well because we are in essentially a sort of hands-on environment with them a great deal of the time. So we know our students very, very well, quite quickly actually. And I think we're able to give that sort of individual feedback at an appropriate level for each individual student. There is no absolute way of, or a standard way of delivering feedback because they're different. Some of them can take quite a lot of criticism early on, and some of them can't, and they do work at different paces, and we have to give some encouragement up the front before you start trying to guide and fix because something may be not quite right. So I think it is a constant process of encouragement and guidance. And the students to be encouraged to stand up and present to each other their solutions, and there will be commentary on it. It's not so much assessment. I mean, we're not looking for a numerical quantity to this. They'll feed back to each other. One of the things that's very important in my industry is the ability to present and a certain confidence, because a great deal of what is expected of them in the industry is to do with negotiation for quite abstract ideas in front of clients, and sometimes very senior clients. And so from quite an early stage we attempt to give them confidence in their own ability to negotiate and present. And in fact we have a module that's professional practice, which we get actors to come in and teach them gesture, psychology of gesture and voice technique and all that sort of stuff, so that they become more and more confident in their own abilities to present their own work.
So what I want to do is just have a little section which is the student perspective on feedback. What do they say? What does research with students say? So back to another video, I think. I might have got my videos mixed up here, but if I have.
Feedback allows me to sort of better myself, like learning what skills I need to work on and what skills are working well.
And look at what we could have done differently to achieve it better.
Oh, it's not playing. Sorry. It's playing on mine. Yeah, it's because I didn't do that. So this is students' perspective on feedback.
Mark and a better understanding of what we're writing about and doing.
Feedback allows me to sort of better myself, like learning what skills I need to work on and what skills are working well.
And look at what we could have done differently to achieve a better mark and a better understanding of what we're writing about and doing.
You cannot get criticism, but good criticism. Hopefully it's constructive of what you've done and what you can improve.
And also to understand what we're doing right so we can continue doing that.
It really lets me focus on, like, within projects, what skills I want to hone in on
by getting feedback, we know exactly what we have to work on.
Yeah, it kind of helps in the sense that I know where I'm going and I'm not doing it blindly.
You know, at the end of it, you want to be employable. So if you've got people that have been working in the industry and then give you feedback as to whether what you're producing would stand up in the industry, I would say it is absolutely critical.
I think it's important because it kind of lets me know where I stand within the course. So if I've kind of done quite well, I'm more likely to take on further projects and stuff outside of the academic side of my course.
It's very valuable, and especially now in my second year going into my third year, it's very important to know my weak sides and my strong sides.
Before, like leading up to assessment, having learning teams, so in groups with students and a tutor, is really helpful because you can kind of bounce ideas about. You understand where your idea or your work lands within a group of people, which is your audience essentially. So
I prefer to get feedback as I go along. Probably more verbal, I would say, more kind of face to face. And have a lot of opportunity as well to ask questions and to perhaps show drafts or, you know, first cuts of films or drafts files to get feedback and then get a chance to refine it.
So tutors are people that have been out in the field, so I sort of quite respect their opinion. Their feedback is often a lot more concise than students, and really they know the marking criteria themselves, so really I feel like most people look towards them instead of the learning outcomes itself in order to understand what is required of them.
Sometimes peers, they kind of are biased as well, because some of them are your friends, you know, so sometimes they kind of cover it up for you and don't really give you really constructive feedback that you really look for, whereas your tutors, they look at you as someone who will be part of the industry in the future. They want to help you grow, so they give you really constructive feedback, making sure that you learn and you grow and step out of your comfort zone.
When you do a project for too long, it starts to get really, really blurry what you're doing. It's like if you stare at it too close and it's just one big blur. And so you could be constantly doing them and not knowing that you're like going completely off proportion or something. But when your peers see you do that and they help you and say that actually that's completely off, this is what you're supposed to be doing, it really helps you, because sometimes teachers can't be there 24/7 around you to tell you what you're doing wrong.
So that was some interesting elements from students. So some of it's just, yeah, we like feedback. It also helps us where we want to be in industry. But also that realisation is that tutors can't be there 24/7, and feedback from other students is interesting or worthwhile. I'm going to just show this one now.
Yeah, I mean, I think our real secret was recognising student-centred learning approaches to feedback, trying to model the feedback around their expectations rather than our expectations, which made a big change for staff in that the way we do the feedback had to change radically. One of our biggest problems we have with our students is time management, getting them to learn good time management skills. So you ask them to do time reports and Gantt charts and project planning, but the actual unpicking of it is really, yes, it happens. At level 1, that's quite a tricky thing, becoming an independent learner. So we started to introduce this concept of phased deliveries, where we set the schedule of phases as they move through the learning outcomes. Because on our course, the model is quite not linear, you know, it is circular, spiral, iterative, but you move through the learning outcomes in quite an order, and you might repeat your learning through those. But because of that, you can set up time frames where you know everyone's done their research learning outcomes, so therefore you can do a bit of formative feedback around it, and you've got the evidence to talk about, and you can do peer-to-peer, and you can do, you know, top-down. You can bring third year best practice into first year, and you can mix and match that in a kind of vertical structure. Peer feedback happens once a week on the timetable. So we borrowed the system from graphics about 10 years ago, the learning team model. And we saw the learning team model as a way to really enable students to become independent learners. Not just that it was, here's 3 hours, go and do some stuff, but some actual activities that are given over to the students to take ownership of. And that started with SWOT analysis of all projects, giving them a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats form, getting them to use that to build critique skills and help one another. And that's got a reporting mechanism where all those feedbacks are fed back into the students' online system. And we use private forums to contain all student feedback, and not only the feedback they wrote, but the feedback staff wrote, so that all staffing and all student members could see their individual feedback and track it all the way through. And that worked well, but it was a bit clunky, didn't push to phones very well, etc. And this year when we went to SharePoint 2013 model, we got really excited because most of the staff are Windows users. And we decided to embrace OneNote as the mechanism for doing all tutorial feedback. And OneNote's a really interesting system because it's essentially a digital notebook. All students can have a private OneNote with a member of staff, or a peer OneNote book with their learning team, and everything's available on every device. And we found that that's been a really successful method. Students really enjoy the fact that a member of staff will type some notes, a feedback or presentation, and it's straight into that. And if they're in the evening on the phone and they want to check a piece of feedback, there's no bits of paper to carry around. It's all digital, it's easy to access. So I think that's been a really successful kind of use of new technology for us. And the group-based learning model, it does take time, but what it saves is actually on your assessment load. So staff are all feeling the pressure of assessment in these 3 weeks. And unless you address it from a pedagogical point of view and try and weave it into the structure of what you do week to week, it's never going to change, it's only going to get more. And the interesting thing that we've trialled in stage 2 this year with these phased deliveries is the senior lecturer there is tracking the ongoing performance, feedback, review and improvement of those students week by week. And we're not sure yet, but we reckon that's going to save at least 1/3 on an actual summative assessment point, because you're so close to the student and you're so on message with the learning outcomes and assessment criteria, you know where they are. Because the other model is, okay, every student has a number of minutes, and the only way that goes is numbers. So the feedback becomes number-based, it becomes database-driven through standardised comments. And I think that's, students value feedback the most, and if we had to sacrifice that, we really lose everything.
And in your formative assessment, do you ever find students want grades?
Yes, they do, and they do ask, why can't I get a percentage? I think, at Falmouth, why we get such good feedback, marks and things like the NSS, is because you're upfront and honest about the answers. I think when you hide things or cloak things, it will slowly unravel. Students will unpick it. They're not silly. They understand these things. And we're all people. And I think the way we explain it is on a day-to-day basis, everyone can agree on a band, usually. A 2-1 or it is a 2-1. But whether it's a 63 or 64 is debatable. And the next day it might be slightly different because of the sort of thing. And I think that's, if you get so hung up on percentages and your students get hung up on 1 or 2%, the whole system can unravel, because the attitude then becomes, how do I get 2% extra to become a first? Not, how do I clearly become a first? What sort of behaviours and work generates first-class activity? And that's a different conversation. How to do it for students, I think what we do is actually recognise the students' strengths, try and enhance them, try and average their weaknesses so that they get the best mark possible. And always looking for the best learning outcome example, so not penalising the student for having one piece of work in their sketchbook that's not quite at the same level as the other part. If they've got the best example within that, and that's at a first-class quality, we should be marking against that. I think what's been interesting with the timetabling project this year, and up front, we went one-to-one tutorial quite hard on our model because our MIFs were designed that way. and our contact hours, didn't map properly. And that was not a challenge, but it was kind of a wake-up call. And we said, okay, so how do we address this? How do we embrace the 3 weeks of assessment and feedback and make that also contact-facing, rather than necessarily have to overload the contact weeks in weeks 1 to 12. So maybe we were using about 16 hours a week to make up for lack of contact in weeks 13 to 15. So we started to explore in timetabling for the year ahead, how can we use a Viva-style system whereby students come in and unpack what they've put on the table. Because we've got this weird thing, we embrace holistic learning, we're in the studio, we're all together, partners in learning, and then we get to assessment and we say, hand your work in and we'll close the doors, thanks. And then we'll tell you about it in 3 weeks' time. And that's really odd. That doesn't sit well with an art and design, iterative, risk-based learning method. And we thought, well, actually, why can't we just involve the students in that process? And I think that's where we'll go with it, because I think if your staff are on message, confident with their assessment methods, there's no reason not to do it.
So I think in that video there was lots of really interesting stuff. One of the, I'll make sure you get these videos, and Drummond, who's our head of sustainable project design, is great. So the themes were, do more formative, because actually it takes off the load for your summative assessment. You're closer to the students and you've already been aligning them with a learning outcome, so that's positive. He also said that the digital side of things has helped, so he used OneNote, whatever systems you use, to make sure that students get as much access to that feedback and can see the way that it develops. It's important. And the last one was really interesting, wasn't it? Include your students in assessment. When you do, it's not a one-way conversation, that everything that we do in our subject areas, in our disciplines, is about working together and partnerships. If you can do that in assessment too, then it'll be more meaningful. So I think that's very interesting. Okay, speeding through. I'll carry on.
Alan, it said that the peer feedback has been built into the timetable.
Sorry?
The peer feedback has
Yes.
been built into the timetable. What percentage of time is allocated to that in the timetable?
Timetabling, I don't put any percentage. I just let them describe it the way that they describe it. It's timetabled. So we have some different systems. We have peer-assisted learning as well, where students help students. So that's also a very interesting system, where they are senior students who have been through it and can help students, and there's sessions with that. And some of that is also peer assessment as part of that. It depends on the head whether they want to timetable that or not. So I always leave it up to them. Okay. Sorry, I am speeding through some of this a little bit. I know I don't have much time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is your assessment weightage almost equivalent to what you have?
There's no rules, so it's up to the departments, and it's up to what agreement they have with the students. So we don't have a cross-university agreement with that yet, because we just expect people to do it. It's in our regulations, but we just let them do it however they want. We have had some papers on group assessment to our qualities board, and they've been very interested in how you assess groups, but so far not on the peer assessment, so nothing across the university now.
Have you noticed the kind of deviation, like if a peer group is assessing a student and the faculty is also assessing, because you said the form is same.
Yeah.
So what kind of a...
The deviation is students are always kinder than staff, and students, it goes two ways when they're self-assessing. They're either too hard on themselves, they're about right, or they're really nice to themselves. So that's where the tracing paper is quite interesting. So here's how your peers assessed you, and they all gave you a B, strangely enough. Here's where you assessed yourself, and you're too hard on yourself, and here's where you choose to assess yourself. So I think it can go different ways. Yeah. So positive impact with feedback.
think about reflecting on, and if necessary, change your conceptualization of feedback. Take care in the way that you deliver feedback. I once had a student, she was Swedish, and I was teaching in Amsterdam, and I met her 3 years after her degree, and she was still talking about feedback that I gave her and said it put her off working for 6 months. So I was feeling quite guilty at that point. I think sometimes we take it quite lightly what the feedback can do to students, and so we have to make sure that we, obviously you've got to be honest and straightforward and deliver it, but make sure that you understand the impact that it has. So dialogue is best. We know that there's research that says that. That doesn't mean that it has to be one-to-one and spoken, but the dialogue where there's backwards and forwards is best. Position yourself as a co-learner. What would it be like as a student to get that feedback? Adopt a more tentative question and approach, and address the power imbalance. We know that there's a power imbalance. You're the tutor, they're the student. Make sure that you don't emphasize that it's also realized during those things. And also the way that we've been saying, conceptualize, prioritize formative and feed forward. So maximize for feed forward where possible. I'm going to show another video now. So this is a video on verbal and group feedback.
I prefer one-on-one feedback, actually.
One-on-one feedback.
I would definitely prefer one-on-one.
Well, often than not, we just get one-on-one feedback.
I think I probably value tutor feedback slightly more because it's almost more difficult to come by, because you can just ask your peers anything, and you kind of, I guess you kind of trust a tutor's opinion slightly more because you know that they've got a lot more experience. However, I think if you're, say, in the studio and you're kind of bouncing ideas around and you're trying to explain your work, and it just people don't get it, then you kind of understand, wow, something needs to change. I think they're both valuable in different ways.
Because it sort of allows me to talk to areas which sometimes might not be comfortable admitting to my peers, where they're like, I'm really weak on this skill, and the tutors understand that and they're there to teach you.
Just because you've got a chance to kind of ask questions and someone to explain the feedback verbally, one-on-one, you can have much more of a two-way conversation.
And they've got an open door policy, so we're really lucky in the way that we can just walk in the door and ask them questions about how we did, or like get feedback on it. We don't have scheduled in feedback sessions.
I always try to see peer feedback. I mean, there are people my age, there are people who also have graphic design eyes, and just getting their feedback is valuable as well.
Every individual has different ideas when it comes to like a certain topic, so when you're having like group feedback, you kind of get that idea from someone that you've never thought of.
They could contribute, but most of the time they don't, because they feel it's not their place to say anything wrong about that other student's work, and it's kind of like a social thing as well. You don't want to say something harsh about that person's work because it kind of ruins the friendship.
So I think it's an important skill to learn to give feedback as well as receive it, and generally a life skill. And if you're working in any organisation, I think it's useful to be able to give feedback constructively.
When we're in a group, it's very beneficial because you get the chance to have a dialogue with the group as well as the lecturer and discuss what went well, what didn't go so well, and where we think we kind of fall within the marking system.
At the starting point, when the project is still fresh, it didn't really help because there wasn't much that we could really give input on. But as the project sort of progressed, it helped a lot in like building up and making sure that our projects were received.
Well, I think it's good to have a variety of opinions, and also it's useful we can learn from each other, can't we? Because some people have got different levels of filming skills or editing skills, so I think it's kind of that learning from each other as well as getting feedback from the tutor that is useful.
So I think there was one really useful thing in that student film, and that was where the student said, we've got to learn to give feedback as well as receive feedback. If you have to give feedback as part of a group tutorial, then you understand how difficult it is, and you can actually give people training on how to give feedback and construct. And I think that helps students actually to be able to do that. So, okay, I'm going to carry on. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but let's just try and see. We can always have a start tomorrow with a bit more of a roundup around this. So there is a types of students, type of feedback that students appreciate, and they said quite categorically one-to-one, and one-to-one. So that's the most expensive and the most difficult and the most valuable. So it's one that we should make sure that we use the best. So take care in delivery. Praise should be specific and related to task. It's important. Focus on behaviour, not the person. So that's really important. So, you know, what are those strategic behaviours that the students are doing which can be positively fed back on? And also, feedback that draws attention from task towards self-esteem can have negative effects on attitudes and performance. So make sure that you're giving feedback and you know that it's positive and it's about the self-esteem. It's a common error to feedback about the self. So be careful when you're talking about specific elements of a student and negative elements, that it can really stop the progression in self-esteem, but also do exactly the opposite of what you wanted to do. So take care in delivery, positive approach, critical, use positive tones and language, critical feedback more effective when sandwiched between positive information. Students want positive feedback, is the research and the way that we know it. Responses varies according to a level of self-esteem. If all comments are negative, I would never write a paper again, was a student comment. I need positive reinforcement. All bad is just too disheartening. When there is too much negative critique, I tend to just ignore the comments totally, as it's just too unpleasant and upsetting, i.e. that Swedish student that stopped work for 6 weeks because of what I said. Take care in the language use. Use language that students can understand. Students often don't understand academic discourse. Well, academic discourse is the wrong words there, but the academic language we use, students don't understand. And there's research around that. It can be confused, and there can be rhetorical conventions we use all the time that students just don't understand. And in the first year, they might leave because of it. Paper feedback can be more helpful than tutor feedback. So actually writing things down so they can take it home and think about it and reflect upon is important. And it's about quality, not quantity. So I don't mind if I say a tutor spent 5 minutes with me and 20 with someone else. I don't really care how long they spend, as long as what they say to me is constructive. So as constructive and qualitative as possible. Don't give too much feedback. Students can feel overwhelmed and just not pay attention to any of it if you're giving too much feedback. And I've seen plenty of cases of tutors going on and on because they just don't know when or how to finish the conversation. And that's an important part. Personalisation is important. So I like to know that the tutors note my individual approach to the task, so that you really understand what they're doing and it's not one general soup of stuff. Context of feedback is important, situated in relationship with the tutor. Positive class climate, rapport with the staff important. For students, the reception of feedback, tutor style, open, relaxed, approachable, down to earth, know the student's name, engage with the student's background and culture, and also the way that you might use technology and those things. So I just want to play one last video. We've got 2 minutes. I think the video is 2 minutes long. So it's about negative feedback.
I haven't really had much negative experiences with feedback. I've had a few I haven't really had much negative experiences with feedback. I've had a few lecturers every now and then who's ended up giving us the same kind of feedback but different marks, and kind of not being very clear on what separates those, and kind of very generic comments on your grammar or research methods.
Sometimes I feel like I didn't improve much on this part of the module, but then in the feedback they don't really state it, and it's sometimes like I feel like I've done well, but the feedback says otherwise, which I don't get as well. But when we seek out the tutors, sometimes they're really too busy to kind of like explain it to you. So sometimes I get kind of frustrated when I look at feedback after the assessment.
I'm not sure I've had any negative experiences. So I haven't had any feedback that's had any, you know, harsh comments or comments that I thought were not constructive or not relevant. It's more not enough and inconsistent is the kind of negative side of it.
There was one experience where I had been referred, and all the feedback I actually got from that project was completely negative, and I wasn't sure what I actually did well within the project. Like, the only learning outcomes that were focused upon were the ones that I did not meet. They did not focus on the ones that I did, so I walked out that project not knowing what I had done well. I feel like even though they're referred projects, they should still have the same one-to-one feedback throughout the project. But I know that teachers would be happy if we did ask them, but I just didn't get the time to do that, especially with the other concurrent projects.
If you only look at these generic comments and then you see everyone else got the same comments, it's difficult to understand why it applied to you and where in your essay or work.
But when it doesn't come across as clear, clarified enough, you kind of sit there really confused, as in that you don't know whether you've done well, what have you done wrong, what can you improve and stuff like that. So to me it's a question, so have you done enough?
You don't get an awful lot of contact time, you know, so in a week you might have one lecture and one seminar, and depending how, I mean, we're lucky we've got quite a small group.
Getting more detailed feedback would then improve on your experience getting that feedback, and you would then, well, personally I would take it and read through it and be able to use it next time I'm writing similar assignments, probably, and especially when it comes to grammar and language.
Perhaps bring in, you know, some people that, magazine editors, to give feedback as well as the tutor, because even though the tutors are kind of industry professionals, that's kind of one view, isn't it? So it might be good to get different views.
Okay, so I think what was interesting there was that the students were saying if we get a whiff that it's generalised or not specific or not personalised, it just becomes quite meaningless, because we look at another student, they're getting the same, and they think, well, how can they give us a grade if all the feedback's the same? So I think that's something that they want personalised, and they want it to be specific to them, and they want it to be constructive. Okay, thank you very much. Actually, there was more me speaking than not today than I had hoped, but there's a lot to get through. I hope it was useful. I think we're going to start at 9:30 tomorrow, and I'll bring some of those case studies as well and change a few things. And thank you very much for spending the time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.